A rights organization has raised concerns about the fate of two Iranian teenagers on death row. The NGO Iran Human Rights told DW News that they could be executed at any time after the Iranian Supreme Court dismissed their appeals. Mohammad Boroghani and Mohammad Ghobadlu were found guilty of setting buildings on fire and attacking police during anti-government protests. Their supporters say the trials were a sham. Well, Mahmoud Amiri Mohammad is director of Iran Human Rights, which monitors and investigates violations.
So Iranian authorities have announced that the death sentence of Mohammad Ghobadlu and Mohammad Boroghani has been upheld by the Supreme Court. It means that they can be executed at any time. But we should keep in mind that we don't have rule of law and a due process in Iran. So international reactions, pressure can still save Mohammad Ghobadlu and Mohammad Boroghani's lives. But again, we know also that Iranian authorities need to execute, need to implement these death penalties to spread fear in the society because they haven't managed to control the protests. Now, about 4 months, they're still continuing.
We can now speak to Gilda Sahibi. She is a journalist and Middle East expert. So we just heard from the director of the NGO Iran Human Rights that the two men, Mohammad Boroghani and Mohammad Ghobadlu, could be executed at any time. Is he right to be concerned?
Yes, definitely. We need to be very concerned about these two and about probably 24 more people who are threatened to be executed. And we can see that we just heard that the regime does these executions to intimidate people in Iran. We can see, for instance, one of these two men that you just mentioned, Mohammad Ghobadlu, his court documents were leaked in October. And even there, just 1 week after he was arrested, you could see that the regime said, we need to execute him and we need to expedite this whole process so that he can be executed. And that was before any court proceedings, before anything even happened. So we can see that these executions are just purely to intimidate people and to stop the protests.
So far, a total of 4 people have been executed in connection with the protest. You mentioned another more than 20 people. Do you think this attempt by the Iranian regime to intimidate the public, to quell these protests, will work the more people they execute?
It has not worked so far. We had the first execution on December 8th, and that's more than a month ago. And we've seen protests since then, just as much as we've seen them before. There were fewer in the few days after the executions, but they have not stopped. And from what I have been hearing from people in Iran, they will not stop because these people have set in their mind that they want to end this regime. And just these more executions and the way that families are treated of the people who are executed. For instance, Mohammad Mehdi Karami was executed on January 7th, yesterday. His family weren't even allowed a last visit. And all these ways of treating people, but being violent, that's making the people in Iran even more angry. And I believe that it makes them more determined to end this regime at some way or another.
Well, here in Europe, there are calls for more pressure from Western governments. But do you think that pressure from the West can have any impact on the actions of the Iranian regime?
I do think that, because that's something that the Iranian regime has not experienced in the 44 years that they have been governing. All these executions, we've had them in the 80s, we've had them since then. They always happened inside Iran, and people in the world never watched what was happening in human rights violations in Iran. So for the first time, people are watching. We know the names of people in death row. We know the names of the young men who have been executed. And that is something completely new for this regime, and they are hesitant of executing. If we weren't watching, if we weren't reporting on that, I believe that we would have had a lot more executions that we have had. So this makes it harder for the regime. It just kind of increases the price of all this violence and the executions. So yes, it does help.
That was journalist and Middle East expert Gilda Sahibi. Thank you so much for all of your insights.
Thank you.